I am so honored to be here. I'd like to thank the Mount Shasta Bioregional Ecology Center for hosting, as well as Spring Hill for physically hosting us here. What a beautiful space to be gathered. Today we are going to talk about useful plants during fire season. So we're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about preventative care, so herbs to start to consider for next year's fire season, plants that you can start working with like a few months before fire season, and I'll explain more about those benefits when we get to that part. And then we'll also talk about acute care, so when the smoke hits or when the fires are in our area, how to tend for our physical bodies, our emotional bodies, our nervous systems. A lot of the plants I'm talking about today are like really accessible plants. I try to focus on plants that are either considered, quote, weeds, or plants that are easy to grow, or plants that are easy to source. Spring Hill has one of the plants that we'll be talking about, elder, here, if anyone would like to take that responsibility on to tend to that beautiful plant. And then there's also a lot of the plants I'm talking about. David, who is a member of the Mount Shasta Growers Collective, he sells starts at Berryvale in the spring and summer. You can get a lot of the medicinal herbs I'm talking about today there. And as we'll get into, a part of community care is collective care. And so us growing plants beyond just our immediate families, but so that we can provide more herbs for the community, is a way for us to begin to rebuild connection after the disconnection that fire season and colonization has impacted us with. So let's get started. Any questions before we get going? Yeah, is it possible to turn it up?
That's as high as it goes.
Okay.
So
I will speak louder. And please, as we go, if I start to trail off or get quieter, just interrupt me and let me know. Or just like, you can wave your hand and just be like, yeah, totally. Okay. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. I was going to start with a very short grounding, just because what we're talking about today can be triggering for some. Some of us have trauma around smoke or fire, myself included. So I'm going to start with like a couple minutes so that we can all arrive and ground together, and then I'll introduce myself and kind of contextualize the conversation we're having today. All right. So I would love for everyone to get comfortable. You can stand, you can sit, you can lay down on the earth, and begin by closing or lowering your eyes. Buenos dias. Hi. We're just starting with a short grounding to arrive together, so feel free to make yourselves comfortable. Close or lower your eyes, whatever feels best, and begin by just tuning into your breath. Taking a few intentional breaths to invite your spirit to arrive in this moment, to invite your spirit to cultivate presence. And as you breathe, notice the sensation of your breath in your body. Notice the way that your body responds to this simple act, the expansion, the contraction. And then expand your awareness with your breath to your environment. Notice how your breath connects you with the air around you. Invite your body to feel heavy as you breathe, giving gravity an opportunity to hold you as you breathe. And simply Invite your spirit to arrive here at Spring Hill on this beautiful Saturday morning in community to talk about herbs to support us during fire season. And as you cultivate this presence, I invite you to set an intention for your time here this morning. See if you can locate or isolate what you hope to achieve here, what you hope to gain, where this knowledge will be shared in your family, in your immediate communities. And allow that intention to ground you, as we will be talking about a lot of plants. And when you're ready, invite your body to stretch or to move, inviting your body to help you transition before opening or raising your eyes and entering our shared space. So thank you so much. I always like to start with a short grounding just to allow myself to arrive. It takes a lot to get out of my house these days. I have a 4-year-old. So my name is Renée, or Renée, depending on the language. I'm a Spanish-English bilingual Yerba herbalist. I have a private practice, so the bulk of my work is one-on-one sessions with folks where we do pláticas. We talk about what's going on, and then I formulate medicine to help support whatever the intentions are with our work together. And the other half of my work is teaching. I teach on the radio. So the shirt I'm wearing, the Herbal Highway, is a radio station and a podcast that's been around for 25 years. We're celebrating 25 years this year. So I started private practice in 2016, and I joined the show in 2018. And my main mentors, my main teachers are Karen Sanders and Sarah Holmes, who up until Thursday of this week lived locally. They lived in Fort Jones, and they just moved to Tacoma, Washington, in part due to climate crisis. And they're getting older, and they lived very remotely, and their house was always under threat of burning down. It was just a hard life to live with. So big prayers to Karen and Sarah on their transition. Let's see, any other pieces that might be relevant? I am first generation, meaning I was born in San Francisco on Ramaytush Ohlone land. My parents, both sides, come from Nicaragua, so we have obviously mixed ancestry, primarily Spanish and Chorotega, which is indigenous to the Pacific coast of Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Honduras. So a lot of what I'm sharing today comes directly from Karen and Sarah and from Karen's Choctaw lineage. Karen was trained by her grandmother traditionally. And then I mix in my personal journey in curanderismo and reconnecting with my ancestral medicine. So that is where the knowledge today is rooted. Let me just grab my notes. Okay, so fire season. I was living in Talent during the Alameda fire. I was there temporarily, and so my family we were evacuated for 2 weeks without knowing if our apartment had burned down. It was a pretty intense time, and around that time I started organizing with a mutual aid group up there called the Klamath-Siskiyou Herbal Alliance, KSHA, and they're actually generously driving down today to offer some free medicine for this group or anyone who's interested that's been impacted by fires. They should be here before we close, and they'll introduce themselves once they get here. But really what we're going to be talking about today is disconnection. So the way that I see the root or the heart of fire season is disconnection. This is, there's a lot of reasons why that has taken place. We don't have all the time to discuss all the nuances there. But what I'm going to start with, or what I'm going to anchor this in, is the big shift that happened on this land a few hundred years ago with colonization. And what happened there was when indigenous people, when the first peoples of this land were the original tenders, their relationship towards fire was about fire management, and there were cultural burns, and this was just a part of day-to-day existence. There's a lot of plants actually that require fire to germinate. Some of the ceanothuses, some of the manzanitas, like they need fire, some of these rare species, in order to birth it themselves. And so they're, prior to colonization, there was a relationship there of tending. And so somewhere around 1910, there was a really big wildfire on the west coast here, and it was called the Big Burn. The fire itself was the size of the state of Connecticut. At the time, the Forest Service was about 5 years old, and they weren't really sure what to do. They didn't have a relationship with original tender, so they weren't getting knowledge that was thousands of years old. What they decided to do was fire suppression. And so from then on, the main goal of the Forest Service and fire suppression was to put out fires. It wasn't a management. It was like, let's put this out as quickly as possible. A lot of people are losing homes. A lot of people are dying. And so they were able to put out since then about 95% of wildfires. And so what's been happening over the course of the last 100 years is that we are now seeing things called mega fires, where because there isn't a management structure in place, more is burning quicker. There isn't a semiotic relationship there. And so one of the things that we can spend a lot of time talking about colonization there, but one of the things that I just want to underline before we move on to kind of the plants is the idea that obviously fire requires water to manage. We need water, and that part of climate crisis is the lack of water that we're experiencing. But at the same time, water requires fire as well. There's a man called Ron Gould. He's of the Mono tribe, and he talks a lot about, there's a really great documentary called Tending the Wild, and in it he talks a lot about how the plants that require fire in order to germinate, they hold a lot of water in their roots, and so what they do is they bring water back into a bioregion, and that's how they're able to form more rivers. That's how we're able to bring more water to the land. And so I want to also turn it around and say that water requires fire, and there's a relationship there, and there's an interconnectivity, and that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. Before we get into interconnectivity, I'm going to briefly tell you what we have in store. We're going to be talking mostly about the fourth and fifth chakras energetically, right? The heart, the lungs, the throat, the thyroid, your arms, your neck. Like, this part of the region is like physically what is impacted most during fire season, and that is energetically also where we hold traditionally communication and connection and heart-based movement. And so not only are we impacted physically during smoke season, we are also impacted spiritually and emotionally, and it's really important that we tend to all of those aspects in ourselves, because if we are out of balance emotionally, that can impact us physically. If we're experiencing a lot of grief, that can trigger our asthma. And if we're experiencing a lot of physical imbalance, that can trigger emotional imbalance as well. And so we're going to talk about all those components. I'm going to read this quote, and then we'll talk about plants. So this is a great book. It's called Undrowned: Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. She is amazing. You can find podcast interviews with her. The book is a really easy read. It's from the Emergent Strategy series that Adrienne Marine Brown cultivates. And I'm just going to read the preface because it feels really relevant to what we're talking about today, because it's all about breath, and smoke season is all about breath. What is the scale of breathing? You put your hand on your individual chest as it rises and falters all day. But is that the scale of breathing? You share air and chemical exchange with everyone in the room, everyone you pass by today. Is that the scale of breathing within one species? All animals participate in this exchange of release for continued life, but not without the plants. The plants in their inverse process release what we need, take what we need without being asked, and the planet, wrapped in ocean breathing into sky. What is the scale of breathing? You are a part of it now, you are not alone. And if the scale of breathing is collective, beyond species and sentience, so is the impact of drowning. The massive drowning yet unfinished, where the distance of the ocean meant that people could become property, that life could be for sale. I am talking about the Middle Passage and everyone who drowned and everyone who continued breathing. But I am troubling the distinction between the two. I am saying that those who survived in the underbellies of boats, under each other, under unbreathable circumstances, are the undrowned, and their breathing is not separate from the drowning of their kin and fellow captives. Their breathing is not separate from the breathing of the ocean. Their breathing is not separate from the sharp exhale of hunted whales, their kindred also. Their breathing did not make them individual survivors, it made a context, the context of undrowning. Breathing in unbreathable circumstances is what we do every day in the chokehold of racial, gendered, ableist capitalism. We are still undrowning. And by we, I don't only mean people like myself whose ancestors specifically survived the Middle Passage, because the scale of our breathing is planetary at the very least. Are you still breathing? This is an offering towards our evolution, towards the possibility that instead of continuing the trajectory of slavery, entrapment, separation, domination, and making our atmosphere unbreathable, we might instead practice another way to breathe. I don't know what that will look like. I do know that our marine mammal kindred are amazing at not drowning. So I call on them as teachers, mentors, guides, and I call on you as breathing kindred souls. May we evolve. And what I love about that passage is that we're talking about breath today, but we're also talking about collective liberation. Like, we can't individually find balance if we can't all get free. And so smoke season, herbal medicine, healthcare, it's all about systems of oppression, systems of power, and finding and acknowledging that. So if we're not able to acknowledge, the cis heteropatriarchy or racism in our day-to-day, if we're not able to have those uncomfortable conversations, we can't find balance. And it's going to impact more than humans. It's going to impact our environment, and that's what we're seeing today. So just a little hot take, contextualizing that. So the plan today is we're going to talk about prevention, and then we're going to talk about acute care. The body systems we're going to cover in both of those aspects are the adrenals, right? The adrenals is where our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response happens. We're going to talk about our emotional responses, PTSD, grief, anxiety. We're going to talk about the immune system, the respiratory system, our livers, where they, how they help us process toxins, and our cardiovascular system. So let's start with prevention. Oh, and along the way, we have some plants to share. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand a plant over to Bianca, and then it can get passed around the group. And I invite you to, especially if you're unfamiliar with the plant I'm talking about, to smell them, to taste them, to touch them. Some of the plants will be in tincture form, and some of them will be loose dried herb. If you choose to engage with the tincture, I ask that you do 1 drop. Please don't hover it above your mouth. We're in COVID times. So what you'll do is you'll place 1 drop on the inside of your hand, or I guess this little fleshy part, and then you can lick it off to taste. Any questions about that? Great. Safety. Okay, So, prevention.
The protocol for the dry?
Oh, for the dried. You can taste it, you can smell it, you can take a piece home with you. You can pour it in. Yeah, some of them are in jars, some of them are in bags. You feel free to really engage your senses with the dried. Thank you, Bianca. Okay, so prevention. This is really where herbal medicine shines because some plants take a long time to get working in the body. Some of them require like 2 to 3 months of consistent intake, of consistent relationship in order for us to feel their resilience, feel their medicine. And prevention is really a way of building resilience. It's really helpful if you get clear with yourself about where your weaknesses are or where the weaknesses of your family, say your family tends towards like cardiovascular conditions, start working with those tonic plants early before fire season to build that resilience. Yeah, you want to get clear about who you're tending and what your intentions are. In terms of dosages, and I'll check in again about this throughout just as a reminder, preventative dosages, if you're practicing energetically, which I do, we're talking about 8 to 12 drops once a day of a plant, of a tincture, or 4 to 6 ounces of tea once a day. The acute dosage is much, much higher than that, but if we're just building preventatively over the course of a few months before fire season hits, you're good with 8 to 12 plants or 8 to 12 drops of a tincture, and really that's respectful both to your body, you're not overtaxing it with medicine, and also to the plants that are giving their lives for us to care for ourselves. So we're going to start with adrenals. So adrenals, right, these are the small triangular glands that sit on top of our kidneys. This is where our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response is triggered. This is what gets taxed with stress. This has a really strong relationship with the nervous system. Tending to our adrenals helps us build resilience in the face of burnout and overwhelm and stress, which is, you know, who isn't stressed these days? So the first plant I'm going to start with is milky oats. So this is the fresh milky tops of the oat plant, same plant that makes oatmeal, but we're talking about the seed heads. And we're talking about fresh tincture. That is the best way to receive this medicine. Some of them, it doesn't matter if it's fresh or dried. Milky oats, you want the seed heads to still be milky, so when you squeeze them, you want the sap to come out. And a fresh tincture is the best way to capture the medicine. If you're a medicine maker, this is the only medicine that I actually use a blender for. So you want to blend with your menstruum. In this case, that's alcohol, organic alcohol. You want to blend the milky oats in the blender with your menstruum and then allow that to macerate for a month. So you want that to break, you want the latex to seep out of the oat tops. And milky oats is fantastic. It's like food for the nervous system and the adrenals. This is really a plant that can help rebuild for overwork or for burnout. Anyone who's recovering from an illness, when you're feeling you're having a hard time getting back to yourself, you're feeling weak, there are no contraindications for milky oats. This is safe for children, for folks with chronic illnesses. The one thing you want to keep an eye on is if you have like sensitivities to gluten. Some folks, like milky oats, can be difficult to process. So if you don't know, start small and then see if you have any sort of reaction. This is a very warming plant, and it's considered a tropho-restorative. So it really has, like, its medicine lies in rebuilding and restoring the nervous system. There's an herbalist out in Portland, Lara Pacheco, who is a Taino indigenous herbalist, and she talks about how milky oats is the medicine for the oppressed. So like anyone who is overworked and undervalued and has less access to privilege, like, could really benefit from this medicine. And I love thinking about milky oats that way because it really resonates with the context that we're building today. The other adrenal plant that I love is borage. So this is the plant. You can work with tincture, you can work with tea. Borage grows really easily where we live, y'all. They have these really beautiful, trippy kind of looking flowers. They are a fantastic tonic for the adrenals. They're much more stimulating to the adrenals than milky oats. So this is going to be a stronger stimulating action, whereas milky oats is more of like a food nourishment. So borage would be really nice for any time that you need kind of a boost of courage. Energetically, like spiritually, borage is known as a plant for courage. So anytime you need like support increasing adrenaline, secretions of adrenaline, or if you need endurance to see things through in the long haul, this is really great for activists, for people who tend to burn out, for people who have trouble finding joy, for people doing a lot of mutual aid work and we just like, you start to lose hope. This is a really great plant to help stimulate the adrenals and support us during hard times. This is not a great plant for someone who has high blood pressure, so use caution if that is you. And then the last one is eleuthero, also called Siberian ginseng.
I have a question for you about borage.
Yes.
So I do have some growing in my garden, and I wasn't sure what to do with it.
Yes.
What do you recommend for someone who has volunteer borage growing in their garden?
Yes, so if you have borage growing in your garden, you can work with the aerial parts, so the leaf and flower. You can try that and store it for the winter time or when your plant isn't, alive, when the energy gets more dormant. But if you have the fresh plant, you can make fresh tea. You can also put the flowers in salads, and you can make a tincture fresh or dried. So for today's purposes, I'm just going to recommend folk method, which is you have your jar, you fill your jar about halfway to 3/4 with your plant, and then you cover with your menstruum. So if you're using alcohol, you cover with alcohol for at least 1 or 2 inches on top, and then you put it in a cool place and allow it to macerate for a month. Then you'd strain and label, always label. You think you'll remember, but you won't. I never do. But yeah, borage makes a lovely tincture tea, and you can also work with it as the flowers as food. The leaves are, as you probably know, they're a little prickly. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great.
And then question, how often can you take that?
So if you're working preventatively, about 8 to 12 drops once a day. If you're working acutely, like you want that stimulating action, then you would do 10 to 20 drops, like 2 to 3 times a day of the tincture, or a cup of tea 2 to 3 times a day.
Indefinitely, or is it something that you can take like where you break from it? Or?
That's a great question. Not necessarily indefinitely. Borage is stimulating. So borage is more for like slowly building preventative care with those lower doses, but in the acute sense, you'd want to work with borage for like a couple weeks and then take a break. Milky oats, which is the other plant we talked about, is much more like you can work for long periods of time. That's doing a lot of like rebuilding and toning, whereas borage is considered a tonic but much more stimulating, so you don't want to overtax your adrenals. Sure. And then Siberian ginseng is the last one we'll talk about in adrenal care. This is also called eleutheral. This is also an adrenal tonic. This is different than the plants in the ginseng family. Different botanical, so not like the American ginseng or the red ginseng. This is eleuthero. That is the botanical name. And this is a really great tonic, particularly for like overwork with sleeplessness. So like lack of sleep, prolonged stress or trauma that's starting to impact your nervous system in the sense that you're not able to like get the rest that you need, that you're not able to, it's starting to impact your sleep, your circadian rhythms, basically. And this is considered an adaptogen. So of the 3 plants I've talked about, this one is the adaptogen. Adaptogens help our body adapt to change. So they tone different parts of our body. Adaptogens are getting really popular lately. Something that my teacher Karen Sanders says a lot is she's very wary of adaptogens, and what she says is don't adapt, change, because she's concerned that people are really relying on adaptogens and not doing the actual work to change the circumstances in their lives, which obviously everyone has different levels of we don't all have the same privilege, so we can't all change our circumstances. So as best as we can to make change in our life so that we're not constantly exposing ourselves to the same stressors or the same traumas as best as we can. Eleuthero can be stimulating to some. It's a really small percentage of people, so if this is a new plant for you, the Siberian ginseng, start really small and only in the morning. So take the lowest preventative dose, those 8 drops in the morning, because if it is stimulating for you, by afternoon, evening, if you take it later in the day, you might have trouble sleeping. So that's something to keep in mind. Eleuthero is also contraindicated with digoxin, which is a pharmaceutical, and is considered safe in pregnancy and lactation. Sometimes there's questions about that. So those are your preventative adrenal tonics. Those are going to help with like your trauma response, your PTSD response.
How do you spell that last one?
Yeah, I know, I have to look at it. Eleuthero. Yeah, Siberian ginseng too. So Eleuthero is the botanical name, so sometimes it goes by that name. Moving on to emotional support. So emotional support, we want to build resilience preventatively so that we can stay calm, as flexible, and as adaptable as possible. And we do this with nervines, with plants that are nervous system tonics. One of my favorites is California poppy. Thank you, Bianca. I have California poppy on my arm. This is like a really special plant of mine. We call this plant dormidera in Spanish, which means sleepy one. You see California poppy all over town, all over here. Great medicine. You can work with the whole plant as medicine. It's best fresh, if possible. So if you're cultivating California poppy, it's a best tincture when it's made with fresh plant. It just starts to lose some of its nutritive, like to the nervous system properties when it's dried, but you can certainly make a dried tincture. You can certainly work with the dried plant as tea, whatever approach. But if you have access to fresh, that is really the strongest medicine. And this is really a plant that I think of for easing the mind-body split. So like when our minds get in the way of taking care of our bodies, if there's any self-imposed pressure, like if you are a type A personality or a perfectionist, or you just kind of like push yourself pretty hard, maybe workaholic, California poppy can be really helpful here. Also really great for all ages, lower doses with kids. I do like 5 drops once with my son. It really helps to that kind of like you've been out all day and you're stimulated and it's time to like start winding down for sleep and you can't get them back in their bodies. California poppy can really help bring you back home, and it feels good. This is also really great for cravings, obviously in the poppy family, not at all as strong as opium poppy, but has some medicine for if there's like addictive tendencies, or if we start to have like pretty pronounced cravings during times of stress or nervousness. California poppy can be really helpful then. There's something else I was going to add. Oh, and when emotional pain has gotten physical. So if you're not tending to your emotional pain and you're starting to notice that you're not feeling physically as good, maybe there's parts of your body that tends to like go out, or it tends towards physical imbalance, this can be really helpful for you then. It is in the poppy family, so you want to have some caution around pharmaceuticals, but with the low doses as we're talking today, I haven't ever seen an issue, so just something to keep in mind. The next is, yes. The petals? I eat the petal. You can eat the petals raw. I have to remember to repeat the questions into the camera. Yes, you can eat the petals raw. I actually love working with dried petals too, like spiritually, like putting a petal under my pillow. It's called dormidera for a reason, and it can really help spiritually. But yeah, I've never eaten other parts of the plant. I'm not sure how those would taste. I imagine there's some bitter qualities there, but the petals are really lovely to decorate food. Skullcap is next.
Can I ask another question?
Oh yeah.
What part of the plant do you make the most?
The whole plant. Yeah, so if you're tincturing, pull them up from their roots, and the whole plant has medicine. You can also just do aerial parts, but there is medicine in the roots, so the whole plant is best if possible.
I'm your newbie.
Thank you. Skullcap is next. Skullcap is another one of those that's best fresh because the dried plant has more sedative qualities, which is great if that's what you're going for, but what we're talking about today is like really nourishing the nervous system. Skullcap is one of those like milky oats. It's like a food. It's safe for all ages. Like it is deeply nourishing to the nervous system. So milky oats does that with like adrenals and nervous system. Skullcap is like really like oriented towards the nervous system. And this is a great food for like crackly energy, irritability, if you're reactionary, if you tend towards anger when you get stressed. Skullcap really nourishes and allows some time for you between the trigger and the reaction so that you have more autonomy in deciding how you want to respond. This can be really helpful for people who like startle easily or jump easily, so like frazzled nerves, like a frazzled nervous system. And if your nervous system is exhausted from depression, so if depression is a part of your emotional picture and it's starting to present in fatigue, Skullcap can be really helpful as well in rebuilding. You want to have some caution in mood-altering drugs, so like magic mushrooms or things like that. Skullcap can impact the absorption of those medicines, of like those kind of psychedelic medicines, so just something to keep in mind. And then we have vervain. Thank you. There's European vervain. There's also vervain that's native to Turtle Island, blue vervain. And this vervain actually comes from Adam and Rachel, who are sitting back here. They have a couple different herb gardens and farms. That is from Memory Seed Family Garden down in the Monterey Coast down there in the mouth of the Carmel Valley. And what I love about vervain is looping thoughts. So nervous system tonic, right, feeds the nervous system, and if you have like that kind of hamster wheel mind chatter, usually it's like self-deprecating or like negative looping thinking. Vervain can help ease and interrupt those patterns. So really great for, what's the word? Negative self-talk, mind chatter, any sort of like, especially if it's like tinged with irritability or agitation or depression or grief. And vervain is contraindicated in pregnancy. It's a pretty strong bitter as well. It has actions in other parts of the body besides the nervous system, so just keep that in mind. And let's see, moving along. Let's talk about, so those are your kind of preventative nervous system plants. We're going to talk about all of these same body systems in acute care, and some of these plants cross over to acute care. But for now, those are kind of the ones to start thinking about and really building resilience in your nervous systems, like a few months before fire season hits. And then immune system, right? Our immune systems are energetically the physical expression of our territory, our boundaries. Like this is really where if we have difficulties holding boundaries, if we have kind of difficulties in terms of like addressing, like if we take a lot of other people's emotions on, if we have difficulties like creating energetic boundaries around our physical territory, this is where we see a lot of weaknesses with like autoimmune diseases or chronic diseases that impact the immune system. And so there's two plants here, and these are really important as preventative because they don't really work acutely. Like you need at least 2-3 months of working with this plant to start to see their benefits. Astragalus, which is a root, and reishi, which is a medicinal mushroom. So I'll pass both around. Thank you. astragalus, the one that's going around, is dried. You can see astragalus come shaved like you'll see in that bag. You can also see them come in like tongue depressor shapes, which are my favorite because they're really woody, and if you put them in like broths, they're easy to pick out if it's just you're picking out that depressor. And sometimes you'll see like the chopped root. So there's different preparations. Astragalus is fantastic in that you're really building your immune system over a long period of time, and it has a sweet taste, so you can decoct, meaning you can like boil or simmer the tea, the root, as a medicinal tea. You can also put astragalus in your slow cooked foods, so your bone broths, your medicinal broths, your beans, your caldos, your soups, your stews, and if you start putting them in pretty regularly, then you and your family are getting that medicine and you're building that prevention over a long period of time. This is a really deep immune modulator and builder, meaning that it gets in there and it sees what's going. It's really intelligent. It gets in there, it sees what's going on, and it helps to build the parts of it that are feeling weak. And it does that by increasing white blood cells, activating our T cells, promotes tissue regeneration. It also cleans and alkalizes the blood, so it's an alternative. This is also antibiotic, anti-cancer, antiviral. Like, this is such great medicine. Most of my clients, especially if we're dealing with like immune system imbalances, are either on reishi or astragalus, depending on like what we're working on in their energetic presentation. Yeah.
About how long do you think you could take this? What's the time span?
Yeah. So you want to start like 2 or 3 months before you start seeing the medicine, and then take a break every 4 to 6 months for like a couple weeks. Always take breaks from herbs. But you can work with astragalus over years. Yeah, this is really one of those plants that are doing, there's always medicine that they can offer. In terms of, spiritually, this is a plant that really takes us out of our ego and helps us get into our hearts. So if that is a picture in your immune support, that is something you can consider. So another reason, Tiris, like besides taking breaks if you're working with a plant long term, like over the course of years, so yeah, take a break every 4 to 6 months for a couple weeks and then resume. Otherwise your body starts to it doesn't start to absorb the medicine as easily. Another reason to take a break from astragalus is an acute illness. So if you're working to build resiliency preventatively, but if you get sick acutely, you want to take a break because astragalus is so strong it might drive that illness in further. So you get a cold, you get a flu, you get COVID, just take a break and then resume once you have recovered. Maybe take some milky oats to help with that transition. Reishi. Yes, Brenda. No, different. You don't have to stop with reishi. Yeah, if there's an acute illness, you don't have to take a break the way you would with astragalus. They just behave a little bit differently in the body. So reishi is also a deep immune modulator, so really helping to build resilience over time. Reishi is another one you can put in your foods. Reishi is bitter, so I recommend starting with really small amounts. Otherwise, your caldo or your soup is going to have a really funky taste that you're not going to be able to identify. But this one really helps to build stamina. Like, I think of reishi as like physical immune stamina and spiritual stamina. You're building for the long haul. And what's nice about reishi that astragalus doesn't present is that reishi has an affinity for the lungs as well. So if that's a weakness already that you're experiencing, reishi can really help to like metabolize environmental toxins such as smoke particles during fire season. This can be really helpful for asthma or bronchitis, any contaminants found in the air. And you can also, if there are some benefits in working with reishi short term for asthma, but again, like long stretches of time is really where you're going to start to see. You want to mirror the rebuilding it does in your body with the building you do over the relationship of taking the plant. Reishi has more contraindications than astragalus. You don't want to work with or you want to have caution. Work with a practitioner if you can, if you have any of these things, but you want to have caution with certain autoimmune conditions, lymphoma, leukemia, certain meds for diabetes or to like lower blood pressure. And you don't want to co-administrate reishi with any immunosuppressants. So that's like a no. All the other ones are like just have caution. So if that's any flags, just consult a practitioner and they can get really specific with what you need and what's going on in your body. Yes.
So is this the same as reishi mushrooms?
Yes, this is a medicinal mushroom. Yeah, absolutely. You work with like the fruiting body, the caps. Respiratory, right? We're talking about smoke and fire season and breath. So here is where thermal energetics has a play, and that just means the temperature of the plant, whether it's drying or moistening. That's really, you don't necessarily need to consider that for any of the other body systems we're talking about, but when we're talking about the lungs and our respiratory tract, it is really helpful to pay attention to that. Because if you have a dry cough and you take a dry lung tonic, you're going to it's not going to help. So I'm going to mention those thermals, and that's just kind of like, just keep that in mind in deciding what plants. And the first one is mullein. So just the bottle, yeah. So I'm sending around dried mullein. Mullein grows abundantly. Mullein is a weed. Mullein is really easy to grow. Though I'm going to hold this up just as a reminder, mullein, if you've ever touched mullein, they're really fuzzy and soft and sweet. And all of the fuzziness, they're tiny little fine hairs. And if you're making an infusion, you really have to make sure to take some care to strain properly. So we always, in the herb work, recommend using a coffee filter. Or like the long tea filters. This is the only time I recommend that people like, or have a really, really, really tight weaved like muslin that you use for mullein. Because those fine hairs, while the medicine will help tone your respiratory system, the fine hairs are going to irritate your throat and can actually exasperate anything that's happening like in the upper tract of your respiratory system. So really recommend, if you're going to put mullein in like your broths, just make sure you wrap it in, like, but create a little pouch so you can pluck it out before you serve your food. And this is like the ultimate classic respiratory tonic. Pretty safe for like everybody. Has so much medicine. The leaves have medicine. The root has medicine. The root is a little bit stronger, but honestly, the root is really only something I work with people that have like emphysema and like really kind of bigger respiratory chronic conditions or like pretty intense asthma. The leaves are great medicine. You don't have to like dig up your whole plant to receive medicine. The leaves are enough. And you can tincture, you can add them to foods. You can work with them over long periods of time. You can work with them acutely. This plant will come up again with acute medicine. And if you ever pay attention to where mullein grows, like this is one of those great examples of plants as people. Like mullein grows in distressed areas, like after a burn, after clear cuts, like they help heal the land and they help bring other plants, and they do the same thing energetically in the body. Like they are they have so many gifts and they're very generous. So this is one that's going to open up your lungs and your bronchi, which is going to increase airflow. This is really nice for healing damaged cilia, which are the little hairs in your respiratory tract. So if you're a smoker, or if you are, exposed to smoke particulate, this is really nice to help your cilia heal itself. It's also really mucilaginous, so it has some moistening and coating qualities that can help for irritation in the lungs. This is really nice for like soothing dry, hacking coughs or like irritated and inflamed throats. This is also a nice expectorant, so if you have like phlegm that's having trouble getting out from the bottom of your lungs, or like it's just too thick, this will help moisten it and move it out. This is also really nice. So, premature babies, the lungs are the last to develop in our bodies. And so this is really nice to give to the body feeding parent. You can give them tea or tincture, and that medicine will get into the milk, and that'll then enter into the baby, and that can help the baby heal their lungs and support them. If you are a smoker, tobacco or weed or otherwise, you can roll mullein into your blend, and that'll help support. It's like a harm reduction approach of supporting your lungs as you smoke. Safe for everyone. Buena is safe for everyone. Can't recommend enough. The next, thank you. This is Yerba Santa. There's a lot of plants called Yerba Santa. This is the one that's native to here. So, Eriodictum californicum. You see them on all the trails like around here. They have like sticky flowers and these beautiful, sticky leaves and these like lavender pink tiny flowers. This is a fabulous lung tonic, particularly for moist conditions because the plant is very, very drying. So this is a decongestion, again, opens up the chest, removes accumulated phlegm. For moist coughs, or like you can sometimes hear it when people have like a lot of phlegm in their throat when they talk or they're constantly clearing their throat. This is a great plant to help not only open that up, clear it up, and get it out. Because you don't want to keep swallowing your phlegm. That's gonna clog it's gonna clog the tubes, the tubes inside your body that you need to have open. And this one combines really nicely because they're so drying with demulcent herbs like marshmallow root, licorice, which we'll talk about in a moment, both of those plants. So again, drying, so can make dry conditions worse. So want to keep an eye on thermals. And then comfrey. Thank you. Comfrey also grows locally. I see comfrey like almost every block in Mount Shasta City. Really, really beautiful plant that we work with the leaf as medicine. You can tincture, you can tea. This is also cooling and moistening, also demulcent, so really soothing to our internal mucous membranes and moistening to tissues, and also tightening. So one of the ways that the expectorant herbal action works is by toning and tightening the muscles to help the body expel what it needs to get out of the body, and comfrey is especially gifted at that particular herbal action. Comfrey is also, so we're talking respiratory here, right? Comfrey has a lot of medicine outside of the respiratory tract, but one of them is wound healing, and you see that in the respiratory tract as well. So this is really nice for like promoting, it's a nice vulnerary and wound healing for promoting the healing of tissue. So any kind of like tissue damage over exposure, long periods of times of exposure. So again, smokers or being exposed to smoke or any inhalants particulate matter that we inhale that are considered toxin, because they tone the bronchi. And then spiritually, this is a plant that really is really protective, really helps aid integration. So if compartmentalization is like a coping mechanism of yours, this can be a really nice way of like bringing in a protective plant to help heal integration, as well as address grief. You want to have caution with comfrey in pregnancy, lactation, certain types of cancer, and if there's a history of liver problems. Comfrey there's more contraindications than a lot of the other plants we're talking about today. Terrace, did you have a question?
Could you put them in a salad?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yes, in a salad.
I want to rub the leaves.
Topically healing as well?
Yes, yeah. We're talking respiratory today, but
I
yeah,
know, yeah.
absolutely topically healing. The one distinction I'll make with comfrey, and then when we get to acute, we'll talk about plantain as well, is that comfrey does like the surface healing, like really helps to regenerate cells on the surface level. So if you have a deeper wound, like a puncture wound, you don't want to heal the surface without healing what's underneath, where plantain comes into play. Plantain's really dry and it can help with that. But yeah, so with comfrey, you just want to be with topical wound healing, mindful of the quality of the wound. Did you have a question?
No, I was saying when I use it in a salad, I rub the leaves to get it. Comfrey, kind of like mullein, has a little bit of spiky texture to the leaves.
So that's spiky texture to the leaves, so rub a little bit before putting in salads. Thank you. Yeah, we were talking about Yerba Santa. So, how do you say that in English? What? Sacred herb, thank you. I was like, Santa is like so many different things. But there are a lot of different types of plants called Yerba Santa, and so I'm talking about the Eriodictum californicum. It's the one that's native to this land here. Any other questions?
Are you using the whole plant with Yerba Santas or the tincture?
With Yerba Santa, the leaves. Yeah. We work with the leaves as tea, and they're really resinous, so I might even decoct the leaves versus just doing an infusion. I primarily work with the tincture of the leaves. The resinous parts, sometimes alcohol, it's like calendula, sometimes alcohol is easier to draw out the resinous medicinal properties of plants. So moving, let me just check the time.
It's 10:19.
10:18.
Oh great, we're doing great. All right, so moving on to the liver. It's important to think about the respiratory tract preventatively, but we're also, in smoke season, dealing with a lot of toxins. There are particulate matter in the air. It's hard to breathe. One of the essential things we have to living. So we want to make sure to tend to our livers, because our liver is what's doing primary work of detoxifying, of cleaning our blood. It's one of our it's one of the main, it's one of the most, the best, an assistant in our main like avenues of excretion, of getting things out of the body. So we really want to support the liver, and 2 plants come to mind here. Milk thistle. So this is the seed. I'm going to pass it around. You can totally pop one in your mouth if you want to taste them. Milk thistle seed is great as a decoction, so you'd want to simmer if you're going to make tea. As a tincture, this is another one where I might like use a grinder to break up the seeds before I make tincture, or that is what I do, so that is what I'm recommending. You can also put in like a pepper grinder, like a grinder that you have specifically for milk thistle, and grind it on your food. The one thing I'll say is that the seeds can go rancid, so I usually keep mine in the fridge. And if I go pepper grinder route, I make sure that I'm using that consistently, so it's not just sitting on my counter, or I'll just pop it in the fridge if I'm leaving town. And this is fabulous. Milk thistle literally regenerates the liver. I don't cite clinical like science studies very often, because I find that it's like a colonizing way of looking at plants, and very Western and anti-indigenous in my opinion, because indigenous people have been using plants for a long time, and we don't need studies to know how to work with them. But what's great about studies with milk thistle is that there are so many that talk about how like you can literally regenerate a liver that's lost like up to 75% of its ability to function. So this is a really, really, really strong, powerful liver tonic. So this is really great for people that have liver issues, alcoholics, people that have drug dependencies. This is really going to help it's a harm reduction approach to help tone the liver and heal the liver while they're in active addiction. And this can be very hepatoprotective, right? Like protective of the liver. So any cirrhosis of the liver or fatty liver, hepatitis, this is a really great plant to begin bringing into your daily ritual. And then again, for any like exposure to solvents or toxins in the air, this can be really great to help rebuild the liver afterwards, beforehand, even acutely. No known contraindications, so pretty safe for most people. And really emotionally cleansing as well, right? Like the liver is one of our organs of cleanliness, so it's going to have spiritually similar properties to our emotions. So if you want to feel cleansed, this could be a nice plant to work with. And then burdock. Thank you. Burdock you can find at Berryvale, usually, not always. Burdock is a root. Gobo in Japanese. Burdock you can work with as food, you can pickle, you can put in your stews, you can make a tincture. You want to make sure, like, so when you look at the tincture, you want your tincture to look cloudy. Like when you want there to be like a milkiness in there, because that's where a lot of the medicine lies. And sometimes you can't get that as easily with the dried root. So if you can work with the fresh root, if you're going to tincture, that is best. This is a nutritive tonic that is not only beneficial to the liver, but also our intestines and our lymph and our blood and our kidneys. I have some caution with burdock in the first trimester of pregnancy because they can also be really toning to our uterus, and that can be problematic to hold a pregnancy in the first trimester. But outside of that, second trimester, third trimester, before conception, lactation, totally fabulous herb to work with. And also helps aid digestion at the same time. So like our liver and our digestive tract are very intertwined. Burdock helps to stimulate peristaltic motion, which helps get the motion we need to get food moving through the body. This can be really nice if during trauma or stress you hold, like if constipation is a way you go to, you can work with burdock to help moisten and create movement. The thing about constipation that's related to burdock and the liver is that if you're holding a stool too long in your lower digestive tract, the toxins that were prepared in the stool get reabsorbed into the body, and then the liver has to do twice as much work to get those back out. So working with plants like burdock, if that's what you tend to in times of trauma or stress, can be really helpful in supporting the liver and doing its job correctly the first time. Burdock is also really nice for stabilizing blood sugar levels. So type 2 diabetes, this is really helpful. Or if your blood sugar spikes under stress, or if you're hypoglycemic, this can be really helpful. And then spiritually, again, right, a liver plant where we often traditionally hold like rage and anger, this can be really softening to those emotions over long periods of time. And then 2 more plants before we can take a little break and talk about acute care. One is hawthorn. Thank you. So that is a hawthorn berry tincture. The berry is more antioxidant than the leaf and flower. The leaf and flower actually are stronger medicine. So you can work with the berry, the leaf, or the flower, kind of depending on what you're going for here. This is like a classic heart and cardiovascular tonic. This is really going to help improve the tone of your heart muscle, improve oxygen uptake into your heart, improve circulation. This is a pretty fabulous heart tonic plant, and you can put the berries in like your food in your broths when you slow cook broths and strain them out. You can put the leaf and flower into your foods. Not the tastiest of plants, but as tincture or as tea or decoction, this is a really fabulous plant to work with. You want to have some caution if you're on beta blockers or calcium channel blockers. Outside of that realm, hawthorn is pretty safe for most people. Yes? Okay, yeah, so the question is open heart surgery in children. Definitely lower doses with children. With open heart surgery, I would work with a clinician. You can definitely work with hawthorn. It's just like when to administer in the healing process, before and after, is like there's some nuance there depending on the individual person's picture. And then lastly, nutritive tonics. So there's so many out there, right? These are the herbs that you generally see in nourishing infusions, your alfalfas, your red clovers, your oat straw. Those are the plants that are really going to help build nutrition in your body. The one that I'm highlighting today is nettles, because nettles, I know for sure David grows nettles. I've bought starts from David in the past. Nettles grows really easily where we live. And nettles is like, I love to think of nettles as an herbal multivitamin. This is like, there is so much medicine in this plant. It can be stimulating for some folks, and it can be too strong of a diuretic, meaning like it can just really exasperate your patterns of going to the bathroom to urinate. But for the most part, this is like a food for the nervous system, for the immune system. This plant can be really helpful in rebuilding nutrition in your body over long periods of time. Antihistamine as well. So if you tend to like hay fever or food allergies, you can work with nettles over a long period of time to help build resilience there. And nettles is also a tonic, so not only to the nervous system but to the adrenals as well. I don't ever work with nettle as a tincture because the really nutritive, like leafy green plants, they just are so much better as tea or in like vinegars. Like nettles would make a great vinegar, or an oxymel, which is just vinegar and honey. So I recommend going that route if that's possible with your nettles. Let's see. Anything else? I don't think so. How do we feel about just taking a couple minute break before we talk about acute care? Does that sound good? Yeah. Okay. I could drink some tea. So feel free to make yourselves comfortable once more. And I love the questions, so please feel open and invited to continue to ask as we move to the plants. So we just left off talking about preventative care, right? So a lot of the plants I talked about, some of them can work acutely, and I'll mention them when we go through the body systems once more, but they're really about like building resilience over long periods of time. And a lot of those plants, they take time to get working. So we're gonna move into acute care. So I'm talking about like when the fires start and the smoke is looming or present. How do we best take care of ourselves in those moments? How do we take care of our emotional bodies, our spiritual bodies, and our physical bodies during acute care? And one of the things that I think about a lot and kind of like contextualizing acute care specifically oriented towards fire season is like, what does it mean to breathe in smoke? It's kind of like thinking about that quote I shared at the beginning. Like, this is a new normal for us, right? Fire season is a thing that exists, but it's gotten, it used to be like a week or two, and now last year, it was like months. This year hasn't been, at least here locally, as extreme as last year, but depending on where we live, sometimes we're living in smoke for like months at a time. Smoke is considered a sacred element in a lot of traditions. In my tradition, smoke is what carries our prayers to spirit. So we work with a lot with smoke, not only as like smoke cleansing medicine, sometimes called smudging, although smudging is a term that is specific to a certain indigenous peoples, and they are asking that we orient away from using the term smudging because that has cultural context and moving. So I like to say smoke cleansing. And so smoke cleansing is one way. Working with like sacred pipes is another way to get our prayers to spirit. And so what I want y'all, a possibility, a seed I'd love to leave with you here is to pray when there's smoke, because even if it's not that intentional smoke, right? Even if it's not like a plant that we're burning to cleanse, or even if it's on a pipe that we've lit, smoke is sacred. And so one way that we can help shift things for ourselves is to pray when there's smoke out and ask the smoke to carry our prayers to spirit, or however you view that kind of relationship with yourself. Really kind of thinking about like, how do we reorient towards interconnectivity? How do we reorient towards reconnection and the idea that our actions in the Anthropomorphine, right, our actions as human beings have consequences not only on other human beings, but on the plant world, on the animal world. Like, we impact all of the beings around us. And we're in a position of power as human beings. And so how can we act more responsibly during the smoke? And a part of that is tending to the spiritual component of what is out of balance. And then grief, of course, right? There's so much loss and trauma. The lungs is primarily impacted when there's acute smoke. And the lungs is where traditionally many cultures believe where we hold grief. And it can be really tough because we're not really taught how to handle grief in dominant culture. We're not really given tools growing up, at least in dominant culture, of how to orient towards grief. One thing that I can share from my culture is in curanderismo, our belief is that there's something called los aires, which are the winds, these emotional winds, and they kind of correspond to like big, difficult emotions, anger, grief. Grief is one of them. And one of the lessons in curanderismo is that rather than trying to control our emotions, either by reorienting and controlling them to be something else, or by damping them, or by setting them aside, we learn how to be in relationship with them. Like, what is this emotion trying to teach us? And once we have a relationship, the emotion can then feel honored to move through. When we trap an emotion, when we're not able to build relationships with our emotions and they get trapped in the body, they turn into illnesses, physical imbalances, blocks, trauma, scars. And so trying our best to build a relationship with grief, with breath, and with interconnectivity, and just in whatever way that makes sense to you, really orienting towards that during the acute fire season. And a part of that is also like creating safety. We can't really, everyone has different levels of safety, and it really is dependent on our levels of privilege. So how can we create safe containers for ourselves to do that difficult work? And the plants can be really helpful here. And so as we move through the plants, it's something that you can consider if one is resonating with you to create safety, to help support that container for yourself. That might be an ally that you can work with to do the difficult work of looking at the hard emotions that can come up during times of trauma and stress. Before we get into the plants, just like basic reminders, during smoke season, mask up because particulate matter inhaled is really harmful on the body. N95s or KN95s are best, but if you don't have access to that, honestly, any mask is going to be better than no mask. I know masks are really political and controversial. I'm speaking specifically as an herbalist and healthcare provider about tending to our physical bodies. So like the less we inhale, the better our bodies can function, the better we're going to feel emotionally, because our physical, as we talked about, impacts our emotional. Recirculate air internally as much as possible. So when you're in the car during smoke season, like set that setting so that the air is actually circulating inside and you're not taking air in. That decreases the stress on the filters on your car, and it decreases the stress on your body of having to filter through the particulate matter. So you work with air purifiers as possible. There's a ton of DIY options for that online if you can't afford to buy like a new one. But also, like, remember, we live in community, so like share if you can. If you have more means, get someone an air purifier. It makes a huge difference, particularly if your home doesn't have an air conditioner and you have to stay trapped inside during the heat of fire season. So let's help each other out. And then be prepared to leave. Something you can do in the kind of preventative care is like really coming up with your list of things that you want to grab. Have that list be visibly displayed in your house so that you're not having to dig for it. Decide what you need. There's a lot of websites that can help like orient you towards what you might need to grab. CAL FIRE has one. Google has one. Like, you can just Google like fire list and it'll give you ideas of things that you want to make sure you grab. I've been evacuated so many times, and even with the list, every single time I'm like, I did not grab that one thing I needed. You just make changes for it. Like, primary part of my life's work and income is client support, and I now carry all of my client files are in a mobile like filing cabinet thing, because each time I was having to pull all this stuff out of a filing cabinet and pack it, and now I just have it so I can grab it and go, because that's sacred work to me and that's my livelihood. So little things like that. And lastly, just like activate your lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is not one that moves on its own. It requires physical movement, your lymph system. So like do some gentle movement. You can do like lymphatic dry brushing. You can do how do you say that in English? You can like rub the lymphatic system towards your heart. But these are all things that can help build resilience in the acute times of care. So let's talk about some plants. Before I start passing plants around, I just want to name a few that come up a lot in fire care or smoke care that I think we need a moment to kind of look at them responsibly. And these are the plants that are endangered. Oftentimes in times of like crisis or trauma, there's like a sense of urgency that gets created. We saw this at the beginning of the pandemic when like the stores were selling out of like basic food, like toilet paper and basic items. The sense of urgency and panic is created, and we're just trying to get like as much as we need for ourselves as possible. That happened in the herb world too. A lot of suppliers were out of like elderberry, mullein. Like we were, as herbalists, we were having a lot of trouble sourcing what we needed during the beginning of the pandemic, and we see this in fire season. And so the four I want to mention today that are endangered, meaning that they are overused, they're not easily grown, they're over harvested, they're over wildcrafted. Wildcrafting in general is really problematic because it mirrors patterns of colonization. There's a flyer in there if you want to learn more about that. But these are the plants that I'm just going to encourage y'all. If possible, there are other plants we can work with. American ginseng, right? This is a great plant for like increasing our resilience to disease. This can be really helpful in fire season, but this is a really over-harvested plant. So there are other plants I've mentioned today that can do the same thing. Spikenard, we have spikenard locally. California spikenard, you see them growing along the rivers. The berries are great as like an adaptogen and to support our adrenals, but the root is really great for the lungs, and the root is what takes the life of the plant, and spikenard is over harvested on the United Plant Savers endangered list. And so I encourage y'all to think about some of the other plants I've offered today. OSHA or OSHA is another one that's thought a lot about with respiratory concerns. OSHA is pretty impossible to cultivate. I've never heard of someone who's successfully cultivated OSHA over a long period of time. Can be really helpful in certain respiratory conditions, and also completely not necessary if you're not one of those like acute conditions. You can work with any of the other plants we're talking about today. And then slippery elm, right? Really moistening plant, really over harvested plant. We're going to talk about demulcents today, marshmallow root, licorice. We're going to talk about plants that you can work with instead of slippery elm. So I think, again, right, interconnectivity. Think, how can we responsibly be in better relationship with each other and with the plants? How can we responsibly tend to our plant relatives? And one way is to be mindful of endangered plants, mindful of how urgency mirrors white supremacy and capitalism, and how can we orient towards plants that are much more accessible, easily cultivatable, or abundant. And so, disclaimer, because it's all connected, right? All right, so respiratory support is where we'll start. Some of the plants I've already talked about are also fabulous acutely. So your mullein, your comfrey, those are great in acute care. They're great to build up tone in the respiratory tract, and they're also fabulous for those acute moments of need. The other one that we didn't talk about is plantain. I'm going to send around, thank you. I'm going to send around the plantain leaf. I am talking about the weed that you see everywhere. Very medicinal. You see them as these long elongated leaves. The leaves are where the medicine is held. You can work with tincture. You can work with the leaf as tea. They're really great in their drawing action. So I am talking specifically about the respiratory system here. They have a lot of medicine outside of that, but kind of energetically, the pattern that plantain offers is drawing. So it's able to draw out deep infection. It's able to draw out like mucus that's impacted in the bottom of the lungs. This is really helpful for healing tissue and restoring lungs when there's been an acute trauma, such as smoke or any irritation or cough. So really great, fabulous to add to any of like your tea blends that you're creating to support your lungs, any deep infections held in the lungs, any festering wounds. So this is a great first aid plant. But even if we're looking just at the lungs, this is great for festering wounds in the lungs and festering wounds emotionally. So if you're having trouble moving a big emotion like we talked about, or maybe there's some resentment, there's just some festering in your emotional landscape, plantain can help spiritually to break up negative thinking and to help create the drawing action that's needed to get something to surface so that you can then move it out. And there are no known warnings to plantain, so this is a pretty safe plant to work with acutely. You don't really have to concern yourself too much with thermal energetics with plantain. And then let's get into some demulcents that are going to be helpful for the respiratory system. Wild cherry bark. You often see wild cherry bark in blends like respiratory blends because they're really, really yummy tasting. So you can see them in like syrups or in cordials, which are sweetened tinctures. With wild cherry bark and licorice and marshmallow root, which are the 3 demulcents I'm going to talk about. And demulcent just means like moistening and mucilaginous. With those 3, if you're going to prepare tea, they're best prepared as a cold infusion because the temperature is what's going to help draw out that mucilage, that demulcent quality. So if you're blending a blend with different herbs, and some of them require heat as a tea and some of them require cool water as a tea, you can always just add your wild cherry bark in after the rest of your teas have steeped and it's coming back down to room temperature, and that really assists you drawing out that mucilage that you want to help coat your respiratory system. So wild cherry bark is really great for like spasmodic coughings that keep you up at night. This can be really helpful in COVID too, like if you get that COVID cough. So like really any built up mucus, and it's somewhat astringent and sedating. So it can help calm the nervous system too and help tone the respiratory system. There is slight toxicity with wild cherry bark over long periods of time. So again, that's why I'm not mentioning it in preventative care. You really want to work with this plant more acutely to receive their medicine. And you don't want to work with wild cherry bark in pregnancy. There are some estrogenic contraindications there, some hormonal contraindications with wild cherry bark. Marshmallow root. Thanks. This is a really fun one to smell because oftentimes, especially if you've had it for a long time, the smell will tell you if it's turned. They can go rancid, and if it starts to smell like sour, it's not potent anymore. So this is a nice cooling, demulcent, mucilaginous plant. Again, you want to do a cold infusion if you're making medicine with this plant. Really moisturizing, really coating, really nice for any dryness, both in the respiratory tract, but like dryness in general. Like a lot of my menopausal clients, we work with marshmallow root to help kind of build moisture back in the body. Really nice for inflamed tissues, really anti-inflammatory, so like sore throats, general dryness in the lungs, dry mucous membranes, any kind of like, dryness in the digestion, constipation due to stress. So we talked about burdock earlier. This is another really nice one for bringing moisture back into your digestive tract to help create movement and get that stool to help assist your avenues of secretion in the body. The taste for marshmallow root can be off-putting to some people if you prepare a medicinal tea correctly. So you've used cold water, it's a cold infusion, you've allowed to infuse for at least 20 minutes, but preferably up until overnight. It can be kind of slimy. And that's what the medicine is. And so for folks who have trouble with that texture of tea, like kids especially, you can add juice. I like adding pineapple juice. I like that combination. You can add orange juice, apple juice, anything to make it more palatable for whoever you need to take that medicine, to take the medicine. But otherwise safe for all ages. And then licorice. Thank you. So that is the tincture. You can also make a cold infusion of your licorice. You can decoct these too because they're hardier, and then just allow to infuse cold as well after the decoction process. This is another demulcent rich in mucilage, so really soothing and to irritated mucous membranes, really anti-inflammatory and really protective of mucous membranes in the nose, in the throat, during smoke, excessive particulate matter. Licorice has the added benefit of assisting with adrenal exhaustion. So there's kind of some crossover here in adrenal support and respiratory support. So if that's a part of your picture, maybe if like you tend towards those adrenal like trauma responses in the acute stage, then this can be really helpful in kind of bringing all of those components in, and also really pleasant tasting. So it's really often seen in respiratory medicines as well because it brings a nice flavor to the medicine. Not recommended for folks with high blood pressure. And you also you want to have some caution over long periods of time working with licorice. So again, this is why I'm bringing it up here in acute care. This is a nice acute plant to turn to when smoke has hit, when we're in fire season. And, oh yeah.
So for the wild cherry bark, you said not long-term, and the licorice also not long-term, but what about the marshmallow?
Marshmallow root is fine long-term. Yeah, marshmallow root has none to low contraindications. And yeah, I work with clients over long periods of time to bring back moisture in the body with marshmallow root, so it's fine long-term. I'm including it in acute care because it also works really quickly. So you don't necessarily need to be building over a long period of time. You'll start to notice more moisture like within a few days of working with the plant regularly. Oh, and that reminds me, acute doses. So we talked about that at the beginning. I'll just check in again. So preventative doses, right? We're talking like 8 to 12 drops of tincture once a day, or 4 to 6 ounces of tea once a day. Really low energetic doses. You don't need a lot to get your body to respond to medicine. I think that's like the opposite of dominant culture. Like big pharma's like, the more, it's like, make it the bigger the better. But that's not really the case with herbs and people. So acute dose is anywhere between 10, 20, 30 drops in that window, 10 to 30 drops, 2 to 3 times a day, or 1 cup of tea 2 to 3 times a day. Depending on the plant, I could even go up to like 5 times a day. Milky oats is one of those we'll get to when we talk about the nervous system again, that you can work with acutely, that actually benefits because it's like a food for the body. You can take that plant up to like 5 times a day to really help rebuild in those acute moments of stress. Any questions about dosages? Yeah.
Any suggestions about dosages for youth?
Yeah. Thank you. So the question is for youth, for little ones. Yeah, so they're really sensitive. They don't require much. I never dose over 10 drops for children. So for preventative, like 5 drops once a day, and for acute, 5 drops 2 to 3 times a day. Like you just don't need a lot, and they respond pretty quickly. Yeah.
Is that the same dosage if you put it in water so that it doesn't have the alcohol taste?
Yeah. So the question is if it's the same dosage in water to avoid the alcohol taste. You can put it in hot water to evaporate some of the alcohol for folks that don't want alcohol. And yeah, same dosage. The only time you really want to taste your medicine, so when you don't want to put it in water, is when you want the bitter. Like if you're working in digestion and you're wanting that bitter taste, the bitter action to perform in your body, your tongue has to signal that to your body, so you have to taste it. And we'll talk about that when we get to liver support in a moment, but yeah, thank you. Okay, last plant for respiratory that most people have in their kitchens is fennel. So I'm passing around some fennel seeds. For folks that are not pregnant, feel free to pop one in your body. You want to have caution during pregnancy. This is really great because it's really supportive of like the nervous system and your lungs and your digestive tract. So sometimes the combination of impact in those areas, you see like some gas or indigestion or just bloating. Fennel can be really helpful acutely in alleviating that kind of triad of imbalance. You can work with the plant literally by chewing a seed. There's cultures that like eat the seeds straight like that after a meal. You can create a decoction, so you simmer the fennel and you drink it as tea. You can also work with the plant as a tincture. Really yummy tasting for most people, and can be really supportive of our digestion. And then really opening to lung tissue, so helping us breathe easier. If we're starting to feel constriction, perhaps emotionally, maybe there's an emotional component or a physical component during fire season, fennel can help open us up. And if there's any wheeziness or like hoarseness in our breathing cycles, fennel can be really supportive here as well. And then moving on to liver support. Please. Yes.
I see it around town a lot. What would be harvesting it? How do you harvest that? Is that something you want to go into right now? And what parts of it do you harvest?
Fennel, we're talking about fennel, harvesting fennel. I've never harvested fennel, so I can't speak from my experience. Has anyone here harvested fennel? Yeah? Do you have any words of wisdom?
So I love the like
Fronds in a salad.
and
Yeah.
then just kind of like when they dry. You're just gonna
Yeah, and so when you dry, you just tamp them to get out the seeds.
just like the branches coming off of some of the flowers. Is that what the seeds? Yeah.
The seed heads.
I don't know what the like absorption, like I know plants dry and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a pesticide warning for the fennel you're seeing around town.
But it grows really well as a garden.
But it grows really well as a gardener. I'm just repeating
Oh,
back
yeah,
for the
sorry.
recording.
No, I was like, I mean, this is my like uneducated knowledge, but I think you can like it's pretty like resilient too. As a super gardening person, you can kind of like plop it in the ground and like you can plop it in the ground, give it a little water,
Plop it in the ground, give it a little water, and you're good to go.
and it comes back.
And they grow back every year.
Our kids like the candied fennel.
Oh,
When
yes,
they're
candied
hard and
fennel.
they're acting a certain way, you're like, hold on, here.
I like when they're acting a certain way. Yeah, great candied fennel for kids is great. Thanks for helping out with that question. Community care. Okay, liver support. So we talked about preventatively working with milk thistle, working with burdock for like preventative liver support. You can work with those both acutely as well. You're going to get like that regeneration of liver support that milk thistle offers acutely. You're going to get that support in processing the additional toxins of smoke pollution with the burdock if you work acutely. Again, it's just about switching the dosage so that you're taking more and more frequently to get that acute care. I'm also going to add dandelion into the mix, which Bianca's going to pass around. This is the root or the weed that we're talking about. Really, really, really medicinal. I could spend hours talking about dandelion, and I have on the radio, so you can check that out. Dandelion, I'm talking specifically for liver support with the root. The leaves have medicine as well. They're a great bitter green. They're definitely more diuretic than the root, but the root is really where you're going to get that liver support that is needed during acute care, during acute need. This is a very cooling and stimulating plant, so for hot liver conditions, this is really nice as a digestive tonic as well. So really going to support the liver as an organ of assisting elimination of toxins in the body. So you're really eliminating toxins when working with this plant. Also clearing toxins in the lymph and in the blood. So really just kind of cleansing waste in all of the systems in our body that help support eliminating toxins from the body. And spiritually, this is really nice for repressed emotions. Like I often think of repressed anger, or kind of like an inability to face what's coming up in yourself, especially if they're really hard emotions, especially if there's like heat around them. This is a cooling plant that energetically helps to move repressed anger or any sort of repressed emotions. You see this a lot in people pleasers. You see this a lot in people that like, I mean, I'm definitely a people pleaser. This is definitely my plant. Yeah, like a lot of like patterns of resentment. You do something to be liked, and then you're resentful that you didn't get the kind of reaction you wanted. This can be really supportive in moving that energy. Yes.
Is the medicinal qualities of the root damaged at all by heat? Like I know someone like makes sort of like a pseudo coffee preparation when they roast it. Is that still medicinally good? Like, are you losing those qualities?
Totally. That's a great question. So does roasting the root reduce some of the medicine in the plant? You know, I've never gotten a straight answer on that. I kind of err towards, yeah, it's not quite as medicinal as like a fresh root or a dried root. Once it's been roasted, some of that medicine can evaporate. I still think there's medicine there though. Like, I don't think that you're not going to get... I don't think that you're not going to get the benefits. But yeah, I think that if you're really kind of acutely going for the things we're talking about today, that working with a decocted tea or with a root tincture is going to be like the most direct way of getting that medicine. And then bitters, like our liver is really connected to digestion. Like we talked about in terms of dosaging, when you are working with bitter plants to support digestion, you need to taste that bitter taste on your tongue. There's really no way around it. So you want to make sure that the medicine as a tea or a tincture hits your tongue, or if you're chewing on something that it hits your tongue, because that's going to be what indicates the medicine in your body. And a lot of times, like when we're evacuated during fire season, it really disrupts our digestion. If we're not feeling safe, if we're not home, like maybe we're not passing stools as regularly, maybe we're just holding and bracing ourselves emotionally for what's to come. And so having a bitter formula or a bitter plant that you like, or a bitters blend that you like that someone makes. Bitters is like one of my love languages. I love tasting people's bitter blends. Like, have that on hand so that you can support yourself during those acute times when you're evacuated, or when you're not home, or when you notice that your digestion is receiving more stress. And there's a lot of plants that you can work with here in the bitter category. Dandelion is one that's a more mild bitter. There's definitely like the gentians that are like super strong bitters. But there's a couple herbalists in town that make bitter blends. L'Oreal is here from Keisha. Yay, L'Oreal, thank you. He'll come up and introduce themselves in a moment. But yeah, there's a lot of herbalists that you can get in contact with, or you can make your own blend and start experimenting there. Immune support for acute care. So we talked about astragalus and reishi as preventative, right? Those are plants that require, well, a mushroom and a root that requires a long time to get going in the body. In the acute sense, a great one is elderberry. So I'm going to send around a tincture. Again, this is the elder plant next to me. If anyone cares to tend to a plant this year to help our community build resilience together. Elderberry is really great because not only is this an immune tonic, but they're also really helpful in the respiratory. They have an affinity towards the respiratory tract, so they're really nice for like any sort of inflammation in the respiratory tract. You can work with the berries or the flowers, and you want to make sure with elderberry that you're working with a medicinal elderberry, because there are toxic varieties. So this is the Sambucus, I think, nigra. The blue berry is the one that you want to work with, and there are a lot of toxic varieties, so you really want to make sure that if you're harvesting, that you know who you're harvesting from, which particular elderberry you're harvesting from. This is also a diaphoretic, so really helps not only to make like a fever more productive, it heats up your body so that it helps you break into a sweat, which helps our skin eliminate toxins. So you're aiding in those processes of elimination of toxins in the body as well when you're working with this plant. And if you're fever, fevers need to do their thing. A lot of times in dominant culture, we like tamp down fevers early, but you want a fever to be productive. If you're stuck in that stage for too long, you want a diaphoretic to help get the heat to move. You want the heat to, it's kind of like a stool staying too long in your digestive tract, and then your body has to redo all that like work that got the stool there in the first place. So you really want to make sure that you have a productive fever going on. I really like the flowers specifically for like respiratory support. I love the flowers and respiratory steams, which is what we're going to end with in a little bit here. The flowers make they're lovely additions to teas. They're lovely tinctures. You don't just have to work with the berries. The berries are just really well known, I think, because they make a delicious syrup. You can make like an elderberry syrup with ginger and a bunch of other really fun herbs. So yeah, careful with which elderberry you work with, and then also the seeds themselves of any elderberry are toxic. So if you're like making jams or jellies, just see if you can filter out the seeds, because they can be really, they can create like, someone can get the runs from eating too much elderberry. And when I make tincture, I just strain that out so that I'm not having to deal with that possibility.
One question.
Yeah.
What about dry versus fresh for elderberry?
Yeah, you can work with dry or fresh for elderberry. Yeah. I love harvesting around this time of year for the berries and then drying them so that I have them on hand for the winter time. In terms of nervines, we talked a lot about a lot of nervines to start us off. One that we did mention was skullcap. Skullcap is one of those like deep feeding nervines that we talked about, very similar to milky oats and like really restoring the nervous system. So you can work with skullcap preventatively, but also acutely. Skullcap is really great for like big shock and big fear. So if you recall, like skullcap being gifted in like reactionary emotions, like when we kind of tend towards anger or like those kind of like reactionary responses to trauma. In the acute sense, skullcap can be really helpful when there's like a big fear component, like perhaps your child is getting nightmares or you're getting nightmares, or there's like susto, there's like big shock and big fear, and that happens in the acute, right? Skullcap can be really helpful there, really safe for all ages. So I love to work with that plant with my son. And then the other two I'm going to bring in the mix is chamomile. It says manzanilla, which is chamomile in Spanish, but that is the chamomile flower. Often really overlooked because chamomile is a really popular beverage tea, which just means they've steeped the tea for like 5 minutes and you get it at your coffee shop. But as medicine, you really want to steep for at least 20 or 30 minutes, preferably overnight as like an overnight infusion. And chamomile has so much medicine. For the purposes of acute care during fire season, what I really love about chamomile is that they also have like gastric support. So if you get like, I like to call it like Virgo stomach or emotional stomach, like if your emotions impact your digestion, this is a great plant for you because they're a really soothing, mild bitter. Like you'll notice the longer you cook or steep chamomile for, the more you're drawing out those bitter qualities, and that's really going to support the emotions that you have trapped in your enteric nervous system, which is the nervous system that's that lives in your digestive tract. Really nice for anger that's related to fear, that presents itself as irritability or panic or sleeplessness. Obviously, this is a plant that people think of when they want to get some sleep support, and that's where that action is happening. And really nice topically for eye irritation. So if like the smoke particulate matter is bothering you, you can either like steep a tea bag of chamomile and then wait for it to cool enough and place the tea bag on your eyes. It's going to help not only with any inflammation around your eyes, but also help to cleanse any of the reactions that your body's having to particulate matter in the smoke in the air. Pretty safe for all ages. It is a very warming plant, so I have caution around like stomach acid excess for folks, but that's really the only thing you have to keep in mind. And then passion flower. Thank you. The bottle says gata panza because that's how we say passion flower in Nicaragua, but that is passion flower tincture. This is cooling, so this is on the cooling end of nervines. And what I love about passion flower as acute care is that passion flower is really gifted at emotional tension. Like passion flower has a lot of medicine like for physical tension in the body, which we don't have time to get into, but emotionally this is for people who hold emotional tension in the physical. Sometimes this can look like restless leg syndrome, or like going to sleep, your body just has like anxiety that you feel physically in your body. That passion flower can be really helpful in easing that, which can happen during acute stress. Also really nice for, because of their antispasmodic qualities, and they're also a bronchodilator, this can be really nice in opening for the bronchi. So you're getting some respiratory support as long as the nervous system action that this plant has to offer. And anyone who has kind of like a low tolerance to chronic illness, or low tolerance to never-ending fire season, like this can be really nice for alleviating some of that tension that can accumulate in the body. And we're pretty much like wrapping up here. I'm going to mention a couple plants to work with spiritually, and then I'm going to briefly explain how to do a respiratory stream that's so helpful in the acute. And then we can, I'll invite L'Oreal to come up here and share a little bit about the mutual aid group that she's offering, and we can just end with questions. So a lot of the plants I talked about today, I'm talking about working with physically in preventative care or in acute care. I did mention some spirit indications for some of the plants. And what that means is that a plants are people, and not only do they offer physical medicine, they also have spiritual support, and you can, just like any person does, like you can feel a person's spirit besides just how they look physically or how they're presenting physically. When accessing like plant spirit medicine or spiritual care, contrary to what dominant culture is telling us and bigger is better, it's actually easier to access the spirit medicine of a plant in lower doses. So like 1 to 5 drops of any of the plants I've talked about spirit medicine that's an easier way for you to connect with their spirit, because what you're doing is you're accessing a less dense form of their energy. The higher the dose you go, the more dense the energy becomes, the more physical the action becomes, the less it's just not as easy for us to get to that medicine. There's definitely spirit medicine in physical doses, but just wanted to kind of explain that before I talk about working with essences or any of the spirit indications of any of the plants I talked about. So some spiritual support during acute care is like, we talked about nightmares with skullcap, right? Like bad dreams. Like if we're not getting good rest because we're in trauma, we're not feeling as resilient in our day-to-day. One spiritual support that can be helpful is to smoke cleanse before bed. And the 2 plants that come to mind that are really helpful are vervain, which we talked about for that kind of looping thinking. So you want to interrupt that, like the loop of bad thoughts or of the worry or of the fear, and that vervain will help interrupt if you burn. And also cedar, which we have a million cedar plants around us. I recommend picking up what's fallen on the ground, windfall. It's more respectful to the plant to collect what they've already offered. And you can burn both of those, cedar and vervain, before bed, just under your bed, around your person, to really help support breaking up a pattern of bad dreams, and invite and call in more rest, deeper rest in your day-to-day. Another spiritual thing that might come up is claustrophobia. Oftentimes when we're trapped with smoke, like you can't see outside your window very well, maybe you've been evacuated and you're in a small space, like it can come up because we don't have the same kind of, we're not as liberated as we are when there isn't smoke. And I really like whale essence. So this is an essence made of a whale bone by my dear friend and colleague, Lena, who is, she's an herbalist on the East Coast, on the Northeast Coast, who's Ojibwe, and made an essence with the bones of a whale. And what whale is really nice in doing is bringing in expansiveness. Like, so I love this, that we're talking about this essence, because it really relates to that quote I read earlier of interconnectivity and like the scope of breathing and how much other more than human beings can teach us about how to be in better relationship with each other. And whale can really help bring so much expansiveness into those feelings of claustrophobia. Remind us that we are infinite, that our energy is infinite, that we can stretch beyond the physical, that form is illusionary. Big love, big integration medicine in whale. And the last one is one of my favorites. This is anemone. It's an essence of anemone made on Boyampuyuk, otherwise known as Mount Shasta, made this year. An anemone, also called Western pasque flower, also called pulsatilla. Anemone is really gifted as medicine for PTSD, medicine for intense trauma, when our spirits try to jump out of our bodies, like in an accident, or with a microaggression, or any time that we feel attacked or unsafe and our spirit tries to leave. Anemone is really great in bringing us back in and helping us feel safe in our bodies once more. This is like one of the most plants I turn to the most in my practice. Really great for panic attacks. Really helpful to like getting someone back in. Susto, anytime our spirit tries to jump out. And anemone is really, 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 really strong. So as physical medicine, this is a low dose plant, like 1 drop tincture, and that's enough. And the essence, I find in my experience, works just as strongly as 1 drop of the tincture. So that's what you have passing around. And then lastly, we're going to close with respiratory steams, because it's nice to hear about all the different plants you can take as a tea or a tincture. But when we're talking about breath and the lungs and trauma, a practice that can be really helpful is steaming. And so it's pretty basic. You decide what herbs you want to work with, and I'll give some suggestions. You get a bowl, you fill it with hot water, you do like 3 to 5 tablespoons. I usually do pinches, like 3 to 5 pinches of plants. Place them in your bowl, make sure that the hot water is not too hot, you don't want to burn yourself, and then you hover over the bowl and cover your whole upper. You want to create like a tent so that you're covered, your head, and your mouth, your eyes, and you just lay there and breathe. And you want to do this at least like 3 minutes, but up to 30 minutes. You want to usually have a box of tissues, because stuff will start coming out, mucus and tears, and you just want to like bring that moisture. And what's so nice about respiratory steams is you're getting that medicine to literally touch the mucous membrane. So it's not like they're getting in your blood and then getting there. You're literally bringing the medicine into your lungs, into your bronchi, into your throat, and you're letting that steam blanket the parts of you that are raw or irritated or inflamed. So you can do a respiratory steam once a day, a couple times a day during acute fire season. You can steam with plants that we've already talked about. Elderflower is really lovely to look at some flowers. Pine is fantastic for the respiratory tract, so collecting windfall of pine that we have locally. Thyme is another great one that has an affinity for the respiratory system that you can steam with. Throwing some rose petals in for some of that heart medicine and just kind of the beauty of having that in there. But yeah, I don't recommend, if possible, steaming with essential oils. Essential oils are really, really strong. I know there's like a trend now of what is called diffusers. Essential oils can be problematic because it takes so much plant matter to produce such a tiny amount of oil, and you can get that medicine with whole plant medicine, which is what we're talking about today. Diffusers, also, the particulate matters of essential oil are really hard for like young ones, children, babies, animals, pets. It's really hard for their bodies to process, and you're creating more work for the liver. So if possible, steaming with whole plants is fantastic, because you get all that medicine and you don't have to worry about the impact the essential oil is having on your body or on the plant world, because again, it takes like pounds and pounds and pounds and pounds of plants to produce like 1 ounce of oil. It's just sometimes unnecessary. So that cedar, pine, thyme, rosemary, the mints, those are elderflowers, chamomile, rose petals, those are all plants that you can steam with as a respiratory steam. And when you're done like breathing in, you can pour that over the stove and do like a room steam. I like in the wintertime, I like putting a pot of water with like pine needles that I've chopped up on my wood stove. Just got to keep an eye on it. You know, you don't want the water to evaporate and then burn the pot. But it's nice to just kind of create some moisture in the air that has medicine when it's really smoky out or really dry like it is here in the wintertime. Any questions about the large amount of plants we've talked about today? Yes. To eat them as sprouts? You know, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know like how the medicine translates as a sprout versus a seed. Does anyone here know? Like for fennel, if you sprouted fennel? No, I don't know. I've never worked with, I mean, I eat sprouts, but I've never worked with a seed that I use as medicine as a sprout. I imagine that there's some medicine in there. I don't know how that would work. Like, I don't know physically how that interacts with the body. Yes.
Are there any of these medicines that should not be used in conjunction?
Together? Any medicines not used in conjunction together?
Like it's going to be potentially dangerous or have bad side effects to use any of these together?
Not necessarily. Besides the contraindications that I've mentioned that should be considered, the only other consideration I'd have is like the thermal energetics. So if you are trying to do something moistening but you're putting drying plants in there, it's going to be counterintuitive to the intentions of the formula or the blend. One thing I'll say about blending is an art that like there's a lot of different ways to approach that formulation or blending. One thing that I notice in like the novice blender is that you don't necessarily need to throw like all the plants at one action. So like in order to access nervine support, you don't need 3 nervine plants in a tea blend because one is doing the thing unless they're doing different actions in the nervous system. And that really opens you up to like the art of like, well, how do I create a tea blend that addresses my particular concerns? Like maybe I want liver support, maybe I want nervine support, maybe I want respiratory support. What plants have crossover action? So maybe one plant will do 2 of those things. But just like kind of thinking of like them, when you create blends, it's a relationship between the plants. And so how do you create a harmonious relationship between the plants that then will also be in harmony with yourself or the person that you're blending for? Does that make sense? Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the question. Yes.
Is it true that plants should be used in the cycle they're grown in?
Is it true that, sorry, could you repeat that?
That plants should be used in the cycle that they're grown in? So like in that year, you know what I mean? That they're grown in?
Oh, is it true that plants should be used in the year cycle they're grown in? It depends. Like mullein, for example, is a biannual. The first year they put out leaves, the second year they put out flowers. So if you're harvesting for flowers, mullein flowers are really great for like earaches. You want to wait till the second year to harvest. There's other plants like echinacea, for example. You don't want to harvest a plant that's too young. You want to give that plant time to build medicine. So it just really depends on the age of a plant, like the lifespan of a plant and your intentions. And then in terms of plant parts, generally speaking, like the aerial parts, when the energy's up in spring, that's when you want to harvest that. And then when the energy starts going back down into the roots in the fall, that's when you want to get the medicine of the roots. So your dandelion root, for example, is going to have a certain kind of medicine you want in the fall versus in the spring. So those are some things to consider.
And then you can keep them for a while?
Yeah, if you store them, if you process them with intention, then yeah, you can dehydrate your plants and store them for winter. I like to, before I got a dehydrator, I would just set the oven to the lowest setting and keep the oven door open so that it didn't trap the heat. And you can dehydrate in your oven and then store them in airtight containers throughout the winter. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, so hydrosols are considered the byproduct of distillation for essential oil. It's the water that you get on the other end that you then filter out the essential oils. And hydrosols are amazing because they carry the same medicine as essential oil, but they're essentially diluted in the water, and they're much, much, much safer for our bodies. Like, I never recommend ingesting essential oils. Friends do not let friends ingest essential oils. They're so strong. They're like pharmaceutical grade strong. They're used in cancer treatments, y'all. Like, we don't need to ingest oregano oil to support our immune systems. We have so many plants we talked about today, whole plants. But hydrosols are really safe. They're safe for all ages, and like Rachel's pointing out, they're really hydrating and moisturizing during the dryness of winter or during smoke season. You can do a stovetop hydrosol. It's kind of complicated to explain right now, but you can probably find that online. There's a couple people in town, herbalists in town, that make hydrosols. Rachel makes hydrosols. So again, Memory Seed Family Garden. Down here they have a medicinal garden, and they make hydrosols. Amy Rachowski, who does Wise Mountain Herbals, is that right? Wise Mountain Botanicals, thank you, also has a still and makes hydrosols. I make hydrosols. They're really, really beautiful, safe, lovely, accessible medicine that I recommend. Thanks, Rachel. Anyone else before we have L'Oreal come up and tell us a little bit about mutual aid offerings? Yes.
Renee, what are your suggestions for folks in regards to accessing or purchasing herbs? I know you talk about harvesting, wild harvesting, but what are like some good companies or just like suggestions around looking at?
Thank you. That's a great question. So suggestions on where to source herbs locally. So the nurseries, again, this isn't the best time of year to get starts from medicinals that we're talking about, although great time of year to get native starts because they like to be planted in the fall. So besides the two nurseries in town and David, who does the starts at Berryvale in the spring and the summer, locally we have some herb farms in southern Oregon. So there's Oshala Farms, which I cannot recommend enough. They make beautiful medicine. They're a smaller scale farm, but they take a lot of care, and that's OSHLA Farms. There's also Pacific Botanicals, again in southern Oregon. They're a much bigger operation, but you can pick up locally, save on shipping at both of those farms. And I get a lot of my medicine. They sell fresh and dried, so if you want to make fresh plant tinctures for yourself, you can get on their fresh list early, and then they'll give you a call when it's ready and you can go pick it up. There's Memory Seed Family Memory Seed Family Outpost out here. Any other that y'all know about? What is it? Kindred Gardens in Weed. Thank you. Yeah, let's support our folks here in Weed after the mill fire. In general, we should support each other. Yes.
Just Bear Wallow Herbs has a lot of tinctures and salves. So
Yes.
Bear
Wallow is Cara Saunders, an herbalist as well that is primarily a medicine maker and teacher, so doesn't work clinically one-on-one, but sells medicine. Cara Saunders is Bear Wallow, and Amy Rachowski is Wise Mountain Botanicals. They are both herbalists that make medicine for purchase, so they work differently than I do. They don't work clinically one-on-one. They make medicine to sell, and I recommend their medicine. They're both local in town. Cara used to do the farmers markets